All right, we're here. Whoa, hey, that's loud. Uh, I like to say you can't finish if you don't start, so let's get started. Uh, Nice to see you guys up and pink pony survivors and all that kind of stuff. Um, Anyhow, I'm Rob Coppersmith. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Michigan Infrastructure and Transportation Association. That's a mouthful. I'm starting my 30th year in just a couple days, the beginning of June, so I've been around the block a little bit. Um, MITA is a contractors association. We represent contractors statewide that do all sorts of infrastructure work. We try to help them with their needs, and one of the needs is to making sure that we have work and that it's funded properly, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So anyhow, to my left is Brad Wieferich, the MDOT director.
Good morning, folks. I am Brad Wieferich, Director for the Michigan Department of Transportation. Thanks, everybody, for being here for the discussion with Rob and I. Just so you know a little bit about who I am. Started my career in the private sector, but fairly soon joined the Michigan Department of Transportation. 28 and a half years later, I'm still here. I'm in my 10th position with the department. As the director, not necessarily a position that I was aspiring to, but very honored and privileged to serve in this role. And happy to be here with Rob today to talk about common issues with respect to what the people of our state would want for transportation.
Yeah, we've had similar paths that way. I started out doing safety and different things like that. So we've made it so far. Anyhow, I think the best way to start this is to just kind of explain where we're at, and we've had some very nice years, the last few years, quite of an infusion, and how we got to that.
Yeah, right. The position that we're in right now, it's not new. This has been decades in the making to get us where we are. It's not like we woke up yesterday and realized that 3 or 4 years from now we're going to have some funding issues. Like Rob said, we have fairly large programs right now, largely due to one-time infusions from different sources, but it has been decades in the making. I look back towards the beginning of my career, late 90s. We were just starting as a department to really look at how we manage the asset of our infrastructure most efficiently, asset management approach, data-driven approach to how we decide what work gets done and when. It's back when we established our goals of having 90% of our roads and bridges in good or fair condition. We had a gas tax that was enacted back then, and we saw progress. It was actually great to be a young engineer then and actually be able to forecast and see where we were going. And we made it. By 10 years later, by 2007, we had made our goals. But even before that, we were realizing that without something that was indexed to inflation, without something that was, again, going to be looking at the long view, that we were gonna have some issues.
Yeah, have some struggles. I think part of our issue has been too is just it's a tough lift to get funding out of the legislature because for obvious reasons it's you're asking for money.
Right.
But I feel like when you look at the history of things, you start back from Blanchard. All of our governors have kind of went the bonding route just because they see the necessity, but those are just really small bites at a big apple.
Right.
And so we've made a little progress, and our current bonding program has been great for the state, but it also leaves people with the impression that we've fixed our problem.
Right, exactly. And again, we can talk a little bit more about the bond program, which has been wildly successful, and we've been able to knock off some very big projects and fix things right. I think we kind of kid back and forth. It wasn't that before rebuilding Michigan we were fixing them incorrectly, but we just didn't have the funding to do the robust, long-term, full reconstruction fix. But backing up just a little bit, I kind of mentioned, how we got here. We've had these other one-time investments. The American Recovery Act was a federal thing back in the Obama days. We had high-risk rural roads. We had priority road investments, and those were great. But again, they were all kind of these one-off things. And you'll probably hear a common theme that Rob and I talk about today is the need for that long-term sustainable look, because that's what makes us more efficient as a department, because we can plan. We can take the time to make sure that we're engaging with stakeholders and that we have all bases covered, that we're working with utilities and other folks in the right of way to make sure we're digging once. Ultimately, that makes us more efficient, and I assume the same for contractors.
Yeah, absolutely. When a contractor can see that there's going to be consistent lettings and get the rhythm of letting and know that, they can probably forecast a little bit on what their percentage of that work might be. So that helps them with staffing. It helps them with equipment purchases. And it really helps the industry turn jobs into careers. And that's a big point for us. We've got a big table full of operating engineers here today. And I've said this a lot, but I don't think I can say it enough. Our industry doesn't leave for other industries. When this funding cliff hits in a couple of years, an operator that operates a crane or an excavator is going to find another crane or excavator to operate, and it might not be in our state. And we already know we have a population issue in our state. So if we're going to lose good people to other states because they like to perform that kind of work, we got a serious problem. And the other thing is, with the IIJA dollars and the bonding money, I think this should be our new normal, if not a little bit more, for years to come. So that puts us in the, we've studied this ad nauseum and data driven, but my work on the Growing Michigan Together Council, we identified $3.9 billion annually shortfall just in roads, and no one wants to talk about another $1 billion in water. So there's just a huge need, and we're past the squabbling of a few million here or there. We're talking billions, and so we've kind of dug a big hole with that issue by just kind of, like I said, taking small bites at the apple.
Yeah, going back to 2007, 2008, the Transportation Funding Task Force identified this as an issue. That was a long time ago. 21st Century Commission, several years later, found the same thing. But what they found was that the dollar amount to course correct was getting higher and higher. And quite honestly, I feel really bad for the legislators that are in power right now, because they've inherited this. Again, this is decades in the making. This isn't one person's or one party's or one entity's doing. It's just something that has evolved. And the longer it goes on, the more difficult it's going to be to pull out of it. And like Rob said, I get it. Asking for more from people is not popular. Not popular with me either. I drive an F-150 with a 36-gallon tank on it. So I get it. But at the end of the day, I think we need to think about what do we really want, and for us to be able to provide the data and the information to see what that, or to at least communicate what that gap is.
Yeah, and I think the issue is driving itself to a certain degree. We've got a declining revenue source because, for great reasons, cars are getting a lot better gas mileage, which is awesome, but it also is counterproductive to what we've been doing. So that was one of the big first slips that we noticed a couple of years ago when we started really diving into this issue, is that we have a major declining revenue source in front of us. And then we're going to have electric vehicles are here. They're not going away. And to what degree they impact the market is yet to be seen, but there'll be other technologies. We have, what do they call them? Half EV, half gas, and how do you create an equitable system that can thrive and be self-sufficient going far into the future, which kind of leads to the RUC or road usage charge question.
Yeah, a lot of discussion in the last few years about alternate sources of funding. In the industry, you hear terms like vehicle miles traveled or road usage charging or mileage-based user fees. I think RUC, road usage charging, is kind of where we're landing on right now. And like Rob said, as the fuel tax becomes less and less available, we do need to look for alternatives. And we're not the only state dealing with this. There's some states that are further ahead of us. Oregon's been at it for 15 years or so.
Yeah, they've been trying.
Yeah, no, and nobody's cracked the code on this yet, even though there are states that have been at it for a while. But the idea is obviously to come up with a fair user tax. The gas tax for nearly 100 years has been a very stable, very, very good way of ensuring that the folks that are using the most fuel, using the most of our transportation, pay the most. So it has been fair. Absent that, we have registration fees right now as kind of the other half of existing funding. Those are really all we have right now. So I think between road usage charging, and I don't know if you want to talk about tolling or not, but that was, we did a study on that a few years ago that the legislature asked us to provide. That again is another option.
Well, if you say tolling, you got to duck because someone's going to fly it. So I don't know. There's just a multitude of opinions about tolling, but I think tolling when I think about tolling, I think about. I get asked a lot as my role, like, well, how come Ohio's so much better, or how come Wisconsin, or how come? And the real answer is that Wisconsin is at 31 cents and we're at 27 cents, but Wisconsin's been at 31 cents for several decades, and have done that. And then you look at Illinois, they're 42 cents a gallon compared to our 27 with toll roads. Indiana is 45 cents with toll roads. Ohio is 38 cents for decades with toll roads. Pennsylvania is at 57 cents per gallon with toll roads. Little old Michigan's been stuck at 27 cents for as long as I've been doing this job. So, with the exception of the bump that we got in the Schneider administration. So, and even he said that was just a down payment on a bigger problem. So,
one of the things, a couple of things that I just came to mind when you were talking, Rob, just so people really understand. Rebuilding Michigan is a bond program. It's $3.5 billion. Like I said, it's been very effective. We've been able to deliver some amazing projects that otherwise would not have been able to deliver. We still have $700 million to go out to market with in the bond program. Governor was very direct. I think she even pointed at me during the State of the State and said, "We're going to continue with that." But that was financing. That was not funding. It's a tool that many administrations, both parties, have used my whole career to make sure that we continue to deliver. You mentioned the IIJA. Yes, that was additional money to the state. But the number that gets thrown out there, just know that the lion's share of that was our federal reauthorization. It was largely the money we were getting before, plus additional, and the discretionary programs that have come along with it have been very beneficial. But again, that IIJA runs out in 2026, I believe.
Yeah, that's out in 2026. Once you release the last $700 million, that's done. And that honestly has a lot of contractors scared because they've lived up to the bonding challenge and the IIJA. They've bought equipment, they've hired staff, they've made investments in their companies, and we see what's going to happen through the data, and it's not a pleasant picture. And we certainly need to. We know there's a need, so that has to. We're not begging for something that doesn't exist. We know that there's a need. And we don't want to lose those people. And like I said earlier, that we don't lose in other industries, we lose in other states. So it's real. I think when you talked on the IIJA, that was another $330 million a year to $350?
It was, for the trunk line, probably $450 statewide because we share the federal funding with our local partners.
Right. And, the locals, have lost some ground through this whole process because of how the bonding money can be spent.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And you know, when I talk to our transportation agency partners, you have how many counties? 83 counties and nearly 600 municipalities. So there's a lot of road owning agencies in the state of Michigan. And when I work with those folks, I want us to kind of have a common message and go together in this initiative, in this space. You know, I don't know about you guys, but when I leave my house in the morning, I live on a county road. I drive to that county road and I'm on a state trunk line. I drive a state trunk line till I get to City of Lansing and I'm on City of Lansing streets. I don't care whose jurisdiction I'm in. I want all of us to be able to provide the transportation system that we all want.
Yeah.
You know, and I get a little frustrated sometimes when people kind of look at, how can we take our existing pie and cut it up differently? Well, instead of cutting things up differently, and are there things we could consider? Sure, there are, but we need a bigger pie.
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
I've been talking to a lot of people. We have a coalition of various business and other interests, and I'm like, we don't need to fight over the pie until it's baked, and then make sure we know how that distribution looks and who can handle it and if it's been implemented properly. But we got to bake a pie first before we start worrying about percentages for different groups. Right. But my argument's always been, we don't know if the formula works because it's never been properly funded. So that just kind of throws a whole different dynamic into the discussion.
Yeah. Hey, before I forget real quick, because you were talking about fuel tax and whatnot, I always like to put a point on the fuel tax in Michigan. A lot of times we get held up as having some of the highest fuel taxes in the nation. If you count the sales tax on fuel, that's true. But the 6% sales tax on fuel does not go to transportation. I think a small piece of it might go to transit, but the lion's share of that, the sales tax, is not directed towards the Department of Transportation. A lot of times you'll see comparisons of our gas tax with other states, and it shows us being very high. But it's largely because of that 6% sales tax. Again, that doesn't go to transportation.
Which pans out to about $1.1 billion a year annually. Right? So, yeah.
Yeah, and the other piece on this, the department, the Federal Highway for many years has done something called the Highway Construction Cost Index. It's basically an inflationary rate for highway construction costs around the country. Maybe 10 years ago, not quite 10 years ago, we engaged with Western Michigan University on a study to look at what does a highway construction cost index look like for the state of Michigan. And not only for us, but maybe some peer states, some other states that are kind of like us. So I use the graph a lot in some of my presentations. You'll see from like 2010 to 2020, about 4% per year inflation is pretty normal. And that's what we've typically used in our 5-year transportation program. Right now we have a 5-year program where we program out 5 years. We use about 4% per year as an inflationary rate. And that's served us very well for many years. The federal index was about that. Our Michigan construction cost index and our peer states were very well aligned. Well, 2020 hit. In 2021 and 2022, and all of the pandemic-related issues with material, supply, logistics, labor, all kinds of things. I used to call it the perfect storm of stuff. War in Ukraine broke out and gas prices spiked up.
Yeah.
From 2020 to about 2023, it's about a 33%, I'll say, increase in inflation just over those few years. So I always tell folks, for the dollar amount that it took me to pave a mile of roadway in 2019, we'll say early 2020, today I'm doing 2/3 of a mile. So with the amount of funding, the buying power has been reduced that much. That means there's that much of the system that we can't touch. That's that many less lane miles that we're paving. That's that many less bridges that we're able to rehab and reconstruct. So that's really put a big constraint on our program going forward.
Yeah, I think that coupled with when you put 50 states on a starting line for IIJA money without a ramp up to those resources, that the simple economics will tell you you'll have a little spike.
Right.
But it certainly has been a driver. But I think the data's starting to tell us that that's flattening.
Yes, yeah, it is. Thanks for mentioning that. Yeah, you'll see over the last year or so, things are leveling out, and it looks like we're returning to more normal rates. But that doesn't mean that the costs have come down. That just means that inflation is now, more stable in line with where it was before.
Right. Well, I think, MITA's been doing some internal research, and through the Growth Council, and everything's data driven, and we're doing a lot of that because we want to be able to back up what we talk about. And we know that 88% of the general public wants better roads, wants better infrastructure. I mean, we've lived it. We've had the Flint water crisis. We've had all sorts of stuff, and so making the national news for various infrastructure problems, dam failures, and all that kind of stuff, and then just driving on a daily basis, you figure out that we need better, and we can do better, and so we know that that there's a will with the public to do something about this. How we get there, I guess, is up to a lot of other people besides us, but the will is there. But our research also shows us no one wants to pay for it.
Right.
So I always say we're the grandchildren on this issue. We have seriously inherited it. Even as people say we don't want to pass this problem off to our grandchildren. We are the grandchildren. Like, we need to fix this. We need to do something about it. A lot of jobs depend on it, and the human aspect of it is very important to our association. And we provide good paying jobs with good benefits, and we're going to lose a lot of them if we don't do something in the next year and a half.
Right. And one of the things I also think about when we're talking about, needs, gaps, funding gaps, as a department, what are we doing? What are we doing about it right now? And I wanted to, get out there that we are looking for how we can be more efficient all the time. Rightfully so, that should be the first question that's asked. What are you doing with the money we already give you? It's a lot of money, and it is. But again, we use our data-driven approach to be able to forecast and analyze it and most effectively, allocate those dollars. But over the last year, we have been engaged in what we're calling our national best practice effort, working with some of our great industry partners in the consulting world that do this work not only in Michigan, but across the United States. Actually, we got a pretty amazing team of folks together that we're looking at, what can Michigan do that maybe other states are doing? What lessons can we learn from others? And, we kind of came up with a few different things about maybe looking at how we do our investment strategy right now. Like I said, we're asset management driven, very focused on condition state, which is always going to be important. But we need to look at how are we operating this system most efficiently? How are we ensuring that it's as safe as possible? How are we looking at these other needs, mobility-wide, as a Department of Transportation? We're looking at, I mentioned our 5-year program earlier. We're looking at expanding that horizon, looking for more flexibility in the planning process. Do some pre-planning 8 to 10 years out, again, to make sure that we're really uncovering every stone as far as engaging with engaging with stakeholders on need, but also working on how can we partner with others and leverage resources to get those things into our 5-year program. And then, of course, looking at our goals. The 90% good and fair has been the department's North Star for a long time. But I think public expectations of transportation and mobility in general are broader than that. So we say we don't necessarily have a North Star anymore. Now we have a constellation, and we need to figure out what those targets are really going to be for, quality of life, for economics, because obviously economics is a the transportation has a huge impact on economics across the state. How do we make sure that we're appropriately lining the targets on all of these goals to make sure that we're providing the system that we know what our customers want?
Yeah, and if to go along with that, we both served on the Governor's Growth Council, but sat through a lot of meetings together with a lot of different people, and it was interesting to me to learn some of the things about how I have 4 boys between 23 and 29, and they all live in the state of Michigan, so yay. But that's certainly not the case for a lot of families. And our state is in a lot of competition, and the youngers, what we learned through that, don't necessarily move to a state for a job. They move to an area they like and then look for a job and to try to meet those needs. So in the past, that wasn't the way it worked. You said, oh, there's a great job in Pennsylvania, I'm going to Pennsylvania, and figured it out. But now, if that individual says, well, I have 4 states I'm interested in living in, it's a quality of life issue. And if they come visit and your infrastructure is terrible and your downtowns need new sidewalks and lighting and all that kind of stuff, we're going to lose.
Yeah.
And it, like, I think you said something about the Roman Empire, like,
Yeah, with respect to the Growing Michigan together, Rob and I sat not only on the council, but also as part of the infrastructure and placemaking, I believe was our work group that we were in as well. There was a lot of discussion in the full council about roads, roads in general, and I think there was a bit of a sentiment of just because you have good roads doesn't mean you're going to grow population. Okay, I get that if you did that one thing alone. But when you talk about infrastructure and placemaking, and the fact, like Rob said, that people want to move to vibrant communities, I haven't seen too many vibrant communities that didn't have good infrastructure. And if you're going to have more people, you're going to need more robust infrastructure in order to support that,
Right.
Whether it's water or wastewater or transit or the roads and bridges themselves.
Absolutely. So, yeah, that was some interesting work. And to our governor's credit, she came into one of our meetings, and we were one of the groups that was maybe a little bit ahead of the curve as far as having data to support our coming needs. So our 3.9 billion annual need got into the report. So that was kind of a heavy lift, but we had recognized the situation early and had a lot of data to support that. But she certainly made it clear that her goal was to cure long-term systemic problems that are holding Michigan back. And she made it crystal clear that a lack of proper funding in our infrastructure is one of them. Mm-hmm. And that she recognizes we're decades behind. And so she's been a big cheerleader for all the right reasons. And from a political standpoint, it hasn't been political suicide for her. People, fix the damn roads. Now we're saying, from an industry perspective, that's right, but let's fund the damn roads. So we really want to take that next step and build on what we've accomplished as a state and make Michigan better for everybody. But to do that, maybe you can speak to this better than me, but if we don't fund our roads going forward properly, the 3.5 billion, you might have just thrown it out the train window, because it won't take very long for us to step backwards even further.
Right. I talked about the kind of the one-time injections over the last 20 years, and they've been helpful kind of keeping us where we are. But I had a boss in the past, when he spoke about this, he would say, go out and look at the roads right now. Just know that without additional funding, that's the best they're going to get. They're only going to get worse. We do everything we can. Like I said, data-driven asset management approach, right fix at the right time. We're looking at national best practices, where we're really trying to do everything we can to squeeze out what we already have. Mm-hmm. But again, on your way home, or on your drives over the next week, when you see the roads, just know that this is as good as they're going to get.
Let's talk, and maybe you could talk about it a little bit, because I've gotten tons of phone calls, and we just touched on it briefly. The pilot program for road usage charges. What's the expectation? What are you looking to find? How are you going to implement it?
Yeah, still a lot of questions to be answered,
Right.
but I'll start out. I mentioned the tolling study. I think it was in 2022 that the legislator asked us to do that, which has been provided. The following year, they asked us to do kind of a synthesis on VMT, vehicle miles traveled. That was more or less kind of a compilation of what other states are doing. This fiscal year, we've been asked to submit for a grant to do a pilot on road usage charging, which we just submitted the grant. I think it was this week, actually, last week.
Last week.
Yep. Okay. Very, very recently, we've submitted for that federal grant to do the pilot. We are engaging very closely with our counterparts across the nation, especially in the Great Lakes area, specifically with Wisconsin, on a pilot as well, to figure out how can this work. So think about it. Vehicle miles traveled is the criteria that I'm going to pay my fuel tax. How do you collect that? Nobody wants a transponder in their car that's going to be tracking things. We get that. But what other ways could there be? Who knows? Maybe some people will. I mean, I carry 2 cell phones most of the time, and I know people probably know where I am most of the time. But that's certainly an understandable privacy issue. Is it self-reporting? Is it quarterly? Do you do it as part of your tax return? Who knows? There's all these different potential ways that we would collect it. But at the end of the day, what we'll be looking to do is working with Treasury, with Secretary of State, because they get involved in some of the collection pieces as well, on what could that be. And I'm sure we'll look for volunteers that can help us pilot some of these different methods of collecting the vehicle miles traveled. The good thing about us working across our borders with our neighboring states is we can look at the interoperability. Right now, theoretically, somebody from Ohio or Indiana fill up in their state and drive up and drive back and never pay a tax. With vehicle miles traveled, would there be some sort of reciprocity? I don't know. We're not really sure how that will work, but we know that it's an issue that we're going to have to tackle.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I always feel like it's not a if, it's a when. Mm-hmm. And I think we need some leadership out of our federal government on that. Mm-hmm. MITA is an ARPA chapter, which is American Road and Transportation Builders, and they are studying all this ad nauseum. So we certainly have gotten a lot of data on what's working and not working in other states, and we are not unique.
Right.
Michigan is not unique, except for I believe that we are grossly underfunded compared to some of our other states. But the problem that we're facing isn't unique. It's one that's going to bubble up across the country to varying degrees. We really haven't touched on tolling and what that might look like in Michigan, but that is another revenue source that most of the other states are taking advantage of. And everyone's like, well, we're a travel and tourism state, you can't toll. Well, what's Florida? So let's do the math on that, But it certainly is something that needs to at least be looked at. Mm-hmm. And it's been studied, and hopefully we just have enough components that as we develop more information for our state legislature, that they can grasp a plethora of concepts and try to figure out, how do we do this, and how do we do it right? And if I were in the legislature, I'd be like, how do I do this so no other legislature has to deal with it again? Let's just set it straight forever. Anyhow.
Since you mentioned tolling and nobody threw anything at me the first time, just a little bit more about what that tolling study considered. We looked at a lot of the major freeways, especially the throughfares, the ones that would capture tolls from people out of state, Chicago to Toronto, 94, 75, all the way up through, it was several of the large corridors. The intent would be to do like all electronic tolling. You wouldn't have toll booths. For those that have been to Chicago or the other cities along the toll road, not a lot of toll booths anymore. You just drive through, plate readers, you get a bill in the mail. But essentially what that would do, I think it was about 550 miles altogether that we looked at. what that would do is essentially self-fund those 550 miles. It would take the work that goes on those corridors off the burden of fuel tax and registration, and again, kind of self-fund themselves throughout their life cycle. So it's an option. Again, all of these
Well, and certainly
are
frees
options.
up budget for other.
Yeah, for other things, exactly. But like Rob said, what I hope we can provide, that I can provide as the department, is as many alternatives as possible
Right.
that can be considered. Tolling is just one of them. Like I said, I do want to work closely with our local partners. Tolling doesn't specifically do anything for the local agencies, other than the fact that the amount of money that it would otherwise take to do work on these routes is, subsidized another way.
Right. You can bond against a future toll road, correct?
I believe you can.
To make sure that you can, do the improvements that are necessary on it, so that you don't have to come up with huge revenues right out of the gate to improve those roads either. So it's certainly an option. It's certainly, a lot of different people feel a lot of different ways about that. But I think when we have a nearly $4 billion annual problem, that you can't take any options off the table. You have to look at everything, and we have to find out what's palatable to the legislature, to the state of Michigan, and to the governor. There's a lot of people that need that, but going back to the 88%, like, everyone wants it done, but how do we get there? And I just think that's going to take, to quote Lance, it's going to take some fortitude from our legislature, and it's a heavy lift. And they've inherited a problem that's been kicked down the road for a long time. Pardon the pun, but it's there. And a lot of times I equate all of this to like your house. Like, you don't want to put a new roof on it, and it's going to be expensive when you do. So are you putting a little bit away, or you fixing it up as you go? So if you just ignore your roof flat out for 20 years, you got a big problem on your hand. Or you can kind of maintain that. We want to get our system to a situation where we can maintain it, and not be in such dire straits.
Right, exactly. That I use the house analogy all the time myself when I try to explain asset management. I sit here as an engineer and talk about data-driven and asset management, and I'm not sure everybody really gets it, but your house, you get a leak in your roof, go up and patch it. That's a small fix. Go up and get it done at that point to extend the life of the roof. Well, that's smart, and we can extend the life, but we can only patch it so many times. Eventually, you need to get to the bigger fix, and that's a rehab. Now instead of doing preventive maintenance, now I'm doing rehabilitation and replacing a roof. If I don't do the rehab, the roof fails. And now I need a new house. Or
Total
I need
reconstruct.
A total reconstruct. So you go from small fixes, make sure you're funding those and doing those to extend life. Again, you can only put so many Band-Aids and duct tape on things before you have to do a rehabilitation, i.e. your roof, to stave off the need for the big dollar fix of reconstruction.
Yeah, and a lot of people think there's a golden pot somewhere that we haven't found of money. And
We're looking.
We're looking. We still haven't found it. I haven't seen that rainbow or leprechaun. But, the long and short of it is, I always even equate that to myself. Like, how many years would I do this without a raise? Like, you can't expect to just be at the same funding level for so long and not have a severe catch-up moment. And we're certainly at that precipice. So where are we at on time? Time for questions. All right. Well, we have any questions? I mean, we have a lot of people in the room that we know, so yes, sir.
Some people herald European roads as long-lasting quality roads, and why don't American roads hold up that way? Could you comment on whether there's a disparity there?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah, we actually piloted European pavement 25 years ago, I think quite a while ago. And they do. They build deeper sections, thicker pavements, more robust pavements. But like I said, the cost to do that, it's really expensive. but European entities, that's where they focus on. Let's do robust fixes, long-term fixes. We don't have the dollar amount to do robust long-term fixes. The Rebuilding Michigan program, $3.5 billion. We're touching about 1,000 lane miles. We have 28,000 lane miles, and that's just the trunk line system. So we would love to do full reconstructs, really deep sections, but we'd only be able to work on such a sliver of our entire network every year that the rest of the network would decline to poor condition quickly.
I just want to emphasize something he just said. We touched 1,000 out of 28,000 with 3.5 billion. So I think that really clarifies some needs. Other questions?
So could you talk a little bit about the technological advances in that go into roads, as well as, what that's going to affect on your budget in coming years?
I can talk about it from the contractor side of things, because I know out at the Howell training site, the operating engineers have GPS and everything on all their equipment and state of the art. And so from a quality standpoint, I believe the product's getting better and better every year from that standpoint, and the educational aspect of making sure that operators and other people in the industry are able to build a better product, I think just, is exponentially growing every year. More technology. You guys went paperless several years ago, so there's just a ton of efficiencies that keep coming. I mean, every time I open a trade magazine, it's talking about how is AI gonna make us better now and all that kind of stuff. So on our side of things, I feel like we've made some huge strides with that area in particular.
Yeah, Rob mentioned the GPS on the equipment and whatnot, and our design has come a long way from one of my first jobs to the amount of information and the modeling that we can provide at time of contract, information that can be fed into machinery and make us all more efficient that way. One of the other things I'd like to mention is we do have a very robust research program. A lot of that is material driven. Are we getting all of the efficiencies out of the latest materials that go into asphalt or concrete or the reinforcement or other bridge elements? That is an ongoing process. And it's not just Michigan alone. We work very close. The American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials, AASHTO, another very big mouthful.
Right.
We work very closely with all of our states in sharing best practices and ideas. If somebody cracks the code and says, I found something new and different that now we can have 100-year-long pavement lives, we'll find it. We're not shy about stealing ideas from others. I think one of the entities I was talking to says we're big into R&R, which is rip off and replicate. Somebody's got a good idea. We're gonna go ahead and use it.
Well, you have terms like innovative contracting.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
we are trying to build a better mousetrap for sure.
Always.
Thank you. As a new legislator on the Transportation Committee budget and advocating for funding, I'm curious what has been in the past, how much effort has been put to try to capture the gas tax revenue, the sales tax revenue off the gas and put it into this funding system?
Lance can probably tell me the year, but it was not in the far too distant past that it almost came a reality one fall, like 2 years ago, 3 years ago. So there was a lot of discussion about it. I think from a public perspective, our research shows us that the public just assumed that it all went to roads. And then when you ask them, do you think it all should go to roads? The answer is yes, but it's the unintended consequences. Who are we hurting when we pull $1.1 billion back to the road system, and how do we make that equitable if we are hurting somebody? So There's a lot of discussion on that, but it's just one part. So, but it could be a big part. But how do you work through that to make it fair for, the downside of it? But yes, it gets brought up every once in a while, for sure.
Yeah, and I think Rob answered that fairly well. You could do that. we'd be happy with that.
Yep.
But wherever that money goes right now, probably wouldn't be happy.
Right. Right.
Any other questions?
You mentioned earlier, Brad, the data that's being collected on the road network statewide and the multitude of agencies that ultimately have responsibility. The 3.9 billion number that's currently in the growth report, do you know if that reflects the local, county, and state needs?
It does.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
MITA's report. So
Yeah, it does. Yeah, we commissioned that report through public sector consultants. So it does take all of that into effect. What it doesn't take into account is the 30% inflation that he's talked about. So, you can throw a little bit of that in there to say that number is kind of the bottom at a certain point, but it certainly does encompass all of them.
And the department uses a pretty robust system that calculates a remaining service life on pavements. So when we build a new pavement, we've analyzed hundreds of thousands of different pavement sections over the years and many different locations, and based on traffic volumes, commercial truck volumes, we can kind of come up with what's an estimated life for that. That gets degraded, and that's what helps us determine at what time we do the right fix on, small dollar fixes to push out that big dollar fix. Statewide, when we work with our partners, there's the Transportation Asset Management Council exists. I was part of it for several years. I really enjoyed being part of that because it brings all of us together. It's counties, it's cities and villages. The townships are there with us because in a lot of counties, townships help fund. They don't get funding directly, but they help fund a lot of the local work. So we do have a common measure called PACER. It's a pavement assessment something. It's a really snappy acronym. We love our acronyms.
Yeah.
But PACER's more of a kind of a 1 through 10 rating, and you can go online on the TAMSI website and actually see what those ratings look like across the state. And we do our own forecasting on condition for the trunk line roads and bridges, but we're also part of the collective forecasting that's done by the Asset Management Council too.
Any more questions? Well, I hope that helps. It certainly is something that's near and dear to our heart. I believe in a better Michigan, and I think the path to a better Michigan starts with awesome infrastructure. So thank you for getting up, and I know that it's a trudge, and it's kind of the last day, so enjoy yourselves, and thank you for coming to see us.
Yeah, thank you all for being here.